Hello. Hello. How is everyone? Fabulous. Hello. Welcome to my seminar, Big Sound in Small Amiga Packages, which is going to go across basically sample generation on the Amiga using bits of assembly and various bits and pieces, and how to squeeze that into 32K or for a 64K intro on a classic Amiga. None of this 060 nonsense. So to kick things off, a bit about me. My real name is Ian. I'm also known as Hoffman. My favourite colour is blue, and my weapon of choice is obviously Protracker. So when I first started, I've obviously been writing lots of Protracker tunes since I was 13 or 14 and what have you. The Amiga sound hardware, it's like preaching to the converted in this room. You all know what it can do. It's got 4 channels of 8-bit PCM samples that you can play. It's got stereo, which is rubbish. And the sample playback is controlled by the DMA, so that the CPU doesn't really have to do anything. And the playback is also forward only, which a lot of people don't actually know that that's the case. So the first time I got into sample generation was when I was working with Focus Design on Electric Skater, our intro for revision 2013. Inside basically there's just a little bit of effect code that I wrote that would take a small sample and then phase it. So the end result was about 500K's worth of Protracker module, but it all fitted inside our little 64K intro. Also, there was a bit of reversing and what have you. So I'll just show you that example now. If it come on, yes. If I could load the right one. Here we go. Excellent. Right, so just move forward. So you'll see in here, it's not making any noise, obviously. So that's our basic chord sample that we've got there. That's about it's a few kilobytes long. So the phase code basically is it's just a standard phaser. You had a delay, and then you add that delay back into the sample, and what happens is you get really lovely, lush, fat chords that go. Actually, that's a different sound. That one's just it's just noise. It's just a sample generated of noise for 64K, but then we phase that against itself, and it gives you that nice. There we go, lovely. Where's the rest of them? And then another chord here. They sound quite nice, don't they, when they're phased out like that? So that was the first time I'd ever tried and dabbled with a bit of sample generation. So we just take the original sample, and then we loop it, and then we make it massive, and then phase it so it sounds all nice and rich. And then we moved to 2015 at Revision, where I entered the old school XE Music Compo. And I did a tune called Generator that used a multitude, a few bits and pieces to generate the samples in there. So we had a 32K executable that actually generates an 800K module, because a lot of the samples, they don't physically exist inside your executable because they're generated with tiny pieces of code. We've also got a 30-second pre-calc rule that they run on the rules for the competition. So we'll just run that now. There we go. Oh, it's being rubbish. Where is it? Yeah. This is loading from a ADF image. So obviously, as you can imagine, the CPU on the Amiga isn't that fast. So obviously, with a 30-second pre-calc, you can't generate that much sample data within 30 seconds. So I use a little trick here where essentially you'll see it's decrunching now. And colors. So the colors are basically, they just tell me which particular bits are being generated. So what we're doing at the moment is we're generating enough for the start of the music. There we go. And now what's happening is it's generating the rest of the samples for the rest of the tune whilst it's running. So you'll notice in this bit, the breakdown goes on for a very long time. And you'll notice that the colors are still there because it's still generating sample data. And I had to make the breakdown twice as long so that we had enough time to generate the rest after the drop. Now it's gone black, everything is generated. And as you can see, there's some memory corruption. I have no idea how that happened, but it seemed to work on Compo Day, so. Right. Oh, jeez, that mouse is annoying. Excellent. So, that was obviously a 32K executable that generated all of that music. I know, so that's, yeah, we will get onto that. Like, you use a certain amount of physical samples and a lot of generated samples. So, so obviously, you know, what format should we use? It's an Amiga, so you opt for Pro Tracker generally because it's the de facto standard. But for this, we obviously want something that's going to make that song data really small. So we pick the player 6.1. It's got a really fast replay code. The song data is really small, and it plays from that song data. It's really fast. And also, the converter has an option to separate the song data and the sample data separately. So you can discard all of the samples from your tune and just have the song data. And it's nearly 100% compatible with everything that Pro Tracker does. Very nearly. So the composition workflow works as you write your code to generate your samples, load the samples into Pro Tracker, you compose, and then if those samples that you've generated work, then you integrate that into your code, and then profit. Going too quick. So the way that I've used, basically there's three main component parts within the system that I use. The first bit is Synter, which is made by our man Blueberry here. It's a tiny FM synthesizer. I mean, seriously, you can actually see the code on one screen. It's that small, or maybe it's 1.5. I can't remember. But it's a really, really great system because it uses like a VST front end with Lua script as the back end. So small it even fits in a boot block. So I'll just show you how that works now. So this is obviously Renoise that a lot of you probably know anyway. So I've plugged in, the MetaSynth is a VST DLL that Blueberry's written that then opens up a Lua script that you can obviously edit in real time and change your synthesizer. So all the parameters that we've got here, so we've got your standard attack, decay. So if we make some noise. Why is that not making any noise? That's why. So that sounds a bit basic. So what we'll do is we'll punch in the modulator. That's why. Oh, that's better, isn't it? Oh, that sounds good, doesn't it? So the really good thing about Synter is that you can play with these parameters as much as you want, and it's really easy to use. And then there's a particular key that you can press, which hopefully I've pressed the right one. And then what happens is the VST then exports that particular sound as raw sample data. So if we go to the folder, where is it? There and there. We see in here. So obviously we've got our there's a Lua script for Synter. And you see where I've pressed that key, there's our sample now. So if I then change these parameters again, more distortion. Ooh. Yes. You see there in the folder, it just suddenly generated the wrong click. There we go. So you see it generated that new sample. So in that sample name, it's all the parameters for Sinter, for that instrument. Everything is encoded into that one string. So what we can now do. Yeah, the file name is basically all of the parameters. So now we can obviously just go into our folder, and we'll see here. And we can load that one. So the beauty of it is that you can just generate as many sounds as you want. You can play with those parameters really easily, and then you just load them into your tune, and then obviously your tune ends up being quite large because there's all these samples in it, but actually they don't physically exist, and that tiny bit of code then generates all those sounds for you. I'm gonna have to keep that one, I think. Wow. Okay. Excellent, there we go. Right, so that's just one of the components. So we've got mainly three component parts that I use for this. So it's Sinter, and it's FOCUSILLATOR, which is a really rubbish synth that I made. It's pretty bad, but it's a chord multi-voice synth. So the one thing that I don't like to do is, you know, if you're going to write a tune, I'd rather have proper chords rather than arpeggiators. So I built this to basically do that exact thing. So it uses basic 256 byte waveforms. You can add in any waveforms. I've stolen them all from Music Line Editor. And it's assembly only at the moment, which is really, really horrible to use. So I'll demonstrate how horrible it is. But the point being is that it generates quite a nice pad or string or kind of that kind of sound, but it takes nothing. So I'll just demonstrate just how difficult this is to use. And yes, I am using the wrong assembler. I should blatantly be using Asm Pro. 2. Yeah. Where did I put it? There we go. So this is the physical source code for the chord generator. So here is all of our instrument parameters. And so you can imagine, you know, compared to Sinter, which is you just have nice parameters and sliders, you can test stuff really quickly. This takes a lot of time because you have to then play with all these parameters and generate your sound and then save it out binary and then reintegrate it afterwards. So for this particular example, assemble. So there's a nice chord, see? And it costs us not very much size at all, because it's just a bunch of parameters and a few bass waveforms, and then it generates that nice sound. So as far as, so we got here in the parameters a base period as to what frequency we're going to generate the sound to, how long it is, how many voices we want or how many notes that we want. A few other parameters for amp limiting and shifting. And then our ADSRs, there's also a high pass and low pass filter in it that they're not great, but they do something. So for example, here I can just go chord 1. So the way this works is it's really fiddly, and I probably need to make a Windows app to like actually generate these sounds so they're easier to use. But what essentially happens is when I want to save this binary data out, I then have to debug my own code, and then I put a breakpoint in there. And then in A0 and A6 registers is the start and end of the sample I've generated. So I can save that binary. There we go. Yes. You see how fiddly this is. Yeah, it didn't save it. There we go. Okay, moving on. Excellent, there we go. Right, so that's FOCUSILLATOR, which is just a chord synth, which is really good for like making nice pad sounds. But the next thing I really wanted was if you've seen my ProTracker seminar from a couple of years ago, I talk about something called Mod to SMP, where you can make a module with 4 channels of drums, and what you end up doing is you bounce that down into basically one big loop. So for our 32K stuff, I created something called SEQ to SMP, which is basically a rudimentary version of Mod to SMP. What it does is it will take all the drums. It's basically, we got a 2-module system where you'll have a module with all the drums in, and then your actual music module here. And then what you can do is which I'll demonstrate in a second, is you can basically generate loops from that, and then just incorporate those into your tune. But only supports note triggering and volume only. It doesn't do anything else. There's no point in resampling an 8-bit sample, because it's already 8-bit. If you resample it again, it'll sound terrible. Actually, so I'll just show you actually in the tracker first. So this is our drums module. So it's pretty punchy drums, right? So in our tune module, which is actually our tune, so what we do now is, I wrote this tool a couple of weeks ago where in the tune module, you will just say, right, I'm going to put in here a sample name that says position. So we've got 3 variables here, which is the song position from the drums, the pattern position, and how many lines we want to render. And we can put, so for example, see we've got one there, and another one there. So what we can now do, is in there, yes, drum tool. So here we go. I'm going to at some point like put this together and actually release it as something that you can use. So we've got here our configuration for our tune module and our drum module, and then our output folder where all the data goes. So we convert the done. Of course, the natural choice. So what now happens is it's basically parsed both of them, the drum module and the tune module, and now we've got, as you can see here, it's actually rendered out each of the drum loops that I've asked for in the tune module, and then just generated them there for us. It's also given us a samples.binary file, which is all the actual drum samples that you've used, and a tune map, not the tune map, and then the pattern data here. So there's our drum list, and then this is just the physical drum pattern. So it's like a rudimentary kind of pattern data, but it generates it all automatically for you. But the good thing is now that I can just go back to here and go, well, I set this one up, so I can go, where is it, output? Yep. And then just go load that. And we go to the next one. So as you can see, these drum loops are like really big. So they take up quite a lot of memory, but because all we're using is the component parts of those drums and then mixing them into a loop, then we save a shed ton of space. And also, the biggest benefit of this is that we've essentially made channel 1 into 4 channels, which is a good bonus. There we go. Wow, we burnt through this quite quickly, actually. Okay, so the other thing that we do is you go through the composition profile, the composition workflow. So you create all your sounds with assembly, you save the binaries out, and then you basically. So what we do with P61 is we create the module and convert it so that we've only got the song data. And then we run the replay in the initialization, and then just after that, we jump out and then render out all of our sounds, and then replace the sample pointers within P61, and then let P61 start playing. The other thing you have to be really careful of when you're doing this is that P61 will optimize your sample slots. So if you've got sample 1, 2, 5, 6, and 7, they will end up being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's a little trick that you can do with that where you basically write a pattern in your tune that uses every single sample at 0 volume, and then it tricks P61 into thinking every sample is used, so it doesn't move them about for you, because that's really annoying. And that's it. Is there any questions? I thought it was going to be a lot longer than this. I've burned through it too quickly. Show some demos.
Why not? I also got a question. You sampled that, you then have to crunch, like you have to crunch that obviously with a tool at the end.
Yeah, so I use what's it called? Crinkler. Shrinkler. Yeah, so Blueberry wrote that as well because he's genius. But yeah, your XE ends up being about 50, 60K, but after that compression, what we also do on all of the samples is put delta encoding on them, so you only get the differences, which makes it pack better. But what I don't like doing is using the 4-bit delta that's in P61 because it sounds rubbish. So we do like that compression as well. So, okay.
What that compression like? Do you do it on the entire block of sample files there, or do you like?
Well, it's the entire executable. So the executable ends up with the song data, the samples that we've actually used in the drum loops and what have you, all of the instrument information, and then that's just one executable, and then we just pack the whole thing with Shrinkler. Yeah, it makes it nice and small. Yes. God, I thought it was going to be a bit longer than this.
What did you do about clipping when mixing the drums together, or do you just divide everything by 2 or 4?
Oh God, no. We max it. We max it as much as we can.
And just straight clipping, or?
Yeah, it's just a clamp on the sample data. But the thing is when you're mixing 4 channels of drums, generally like the amount of clipping that you get is not that much, and at 8-bit you don't really hear it anyway, and it sounds a bit better. So yeah, this was a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be. Any more questions?
You mentioned something about how to use normal samples also, because you said you are not generating everything, but you are using also the normal samples. Or was it the last part?
Yeah, so particularly for the drum loop generator, that exports all the, obviously those physical drums have to exist. Okay. Anyone that tries to synthesize drums will know that they never sound like proper drums. So we use samples for those, and then they also use 1 or 2 samples here and there just to flesh out the sound a bit. But then again, we just delta encode those so they're a bit smaller, and then squash it all down. Okay. God, I thought it was going to be much longer than this. I think we're done then. Thank you.